So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We got a full hour material, some really good stuff, some things that I have been finding to be truly useful in my journey of working with Fabric, working with Databricks, Medallion architecture, and I wanted to share what I've been learning. It's taken me a while to get to the spot, and so I'm hoping to accelerate your experiences in working with Fabric and working with Medallion architecture, including maybe just seeing some ways to work with data flows, data pipelines, notebooks, lake houses, Power BI, semantic models, how all those could fit together. I'm going to keep it tied to very specific data management structure, but hey, hope you get some good stuff. There is the chat window that you can ask questions. Now, I will probably not be able to answer a lot of the questions in line just because I'm going to be focused on the presentation and my demos. So here's my thought. If you all could help each other, or I will get to them, or if one of you wants to attempt to raise your hand or just come off mute and quickly say, hey, I got a question there. I would really like to answer your questions. The value in being to any of these things live nowadays, to me, is to be able to ask pertinent questions of the speaker, myself in this case, or of the people that you're here with. A lot of this material you could find. You could probably go to Copilot or ChatGPT and ask a lot of the stuff, and you might get 50% of the way there, meaning that 50% left is still a huge gap, which is, again, why you're here. But hey, please do ask those questions. I will do whatever I can to get to your questions at the end as well. Anything that I didn't get to, I'll just reply to in thread, and we'll get some whole value out of this stuff. So yes, again, thank you all for joining. I'm going to say we've got enough of a quorum, so I'm going to get started. For those of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Eric Overfield. I am a Microsoft Regional Director, a Microsoft MVP, based out of California in the United States, West Coast. It's still hot here. We are in the ending of our summer. Fall is supposed to kind of starting. Normally it's the beginning of September, but not where I am. Here it's still pretty warm, but hey, such is life. I am on the PNP team. That's a group that deals mainly with Microsoft technologies. That is where my background originally was from. Now I address much more of the holistic Microsoft ecosystem, from data, from AI to, of course, the M65 platform, which is where I really got my start. I focus more on the executive side, although I am an engineer by trade, so I love getting a little geeky and nerdy. So those of you who want some of that stuff, hey, I do hope I'll get it, but I do try to keep it a little more high level for you as well, to be able to try to derive some business decisions and value out of the material that I provide. I am the CIO of a company called CreoSpark. We're based out of California and Toronto, and we provide services around Microsoft technologies. So if you get stuck doing any of this stuff, hey, please reach out to me. I'd love to be able to do some work for you and see how you can get some value out of it. Yeah, perfect. So the value, my value proposition for you today. This is a data conference. This is all about, to me, Fabric. This is about data. This is about all kinds of really cool stuff. And what I thought would be really fun to talk about is one of the data management strategies, which is the Medallion architecture, which my org is using internally a lot, which I lead up in my own org. And we help our clients do this. And I've seen a lot of value come out of this. As Fabric has evolved recently, it's been fun to see how to implement Medallion in the aspect of how Fabric would like to do it. Now, it's still a lot of Databricks kind of technology and ideas, a lot of the lakehouse tech terminology and whatnot, but there's still some subtlety. So I thought it would be fun and interesting and valuable for you all to look at what the Medallion architecture is, and then how I have found it to be successful in implementing it within Fabric. So that's my agenda. I can't start unless I start at the Medallion architecture, because not all of you are going to know what it is, or you might have heard of it, but you don't know all the specifics. So I want to go through that. I want to talk about the benefits of it. I want to talk about how that works within Fabric. I also then want to give you some real experiences for me on the challenges and the practical guidance. And then I tend to show this live. I want to show you, albeit a very simple data structure. You're all going to probably laugh at it, totally fine, but I don't want to inundate you with something that we're doing in production where we've got hundreds of fact tables and many more hundreds of dimension tables, and how we're running that through the pipeline. It'd be too much, right? The semantic model would just be like crazy to look at. So I want to show you some really basic ideas just so you can see it put together in how Fabric would like it done the most. So Best place to me to start then, Medallion. What is it? Let's just start there at the beginning. It's a pattern for how you would be designing your data within your organization. This is something that was coined by Databricks not too long ago, actually, a couple years ago, a little more, a couple years ago. And it's this idea, it's an organizational method that was created, built around the idea of lake houses. Now, not just, lake houses in Fabric, but lake houses in general, of course. And so this was not built using the idea of what Microsoft was doing, rather something that Databricks came up with. And then Microsoft and AWS and others have adopted this data design pattern as well. The infographic you're seeing, I'm going to come back to it. I don't want to specifically talk about those things right now, like the specifics. So we're going to come back to this design, and hopefully it will all make a lot more sense if you haven't seen it before. The idea, though, is that you have these different layers of data. There's 3 primary layers: bronze, silver, gold. That's the naming, the nomenclature of the Medallion architecture. Since that time, since it's released, people have added in this idea of a platinum layer. I'm going to talk about that just a little bit because it goes a little beyond what we're trying to do in this particular discussion, but it is interesting and I will introduce it. The idea, though, is that each layer, it has a promise of the quality of the data at that particular layer. It is attempting to do a specific thing at each layer, and we will go through that. And that actually, to me, presents some of the challenges we'll see in a little bit of time, that sometimes I back in my project management days, which was real light, when Scrum was all the rage, there was this idea of Scrum, but, so we want to follow Scrum, but we have this other idea. Same thing here. It's kind of like this Medallion but kind of thing. Well, yeah, you're supposed to do this at these layers, and ideally you do, but sometimes you're going to find that, well, the data's not doing it the way that I want. I think I should do something here and there. And again, challenges we'll talk about, some ideas I have, and some real life examples that I can give you on, yeah, you could argue probably not the right way, but we could also argue, no, it made the most sense at that layer. So the idea, though, is that each layer has this assurance to it, and through this whole model, we're following along with ACID there: atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. The general premise is that when data gets into your lakehouse, no matter where you are in the flow, in particular at the end, you can always recreate where you're at because you still have access to the raw source data and you haven't attempted to do anything with it. So what I want to do with that basic idea is, now let's look at the 3 layers. I'll talk about platinum a little bit, and then I want to talk about some benefits, because there's some reasons why we do this that aren't always readily clear. And to me, it's a no-brainer. Of the other models that are out there, yeah, if you're dealing with some like real-time analytics, you're dealing with some really small little things, maybe this isn't worth it. But for most data projects that I've been running into, this is, to me, the way to do it, because of how you have these data assurances, quality assurances at these different layers. So we start at the bronze layer, the bottommost layer. This is all about raw data. The concept here is that you were just ingesting the data from wherever it lives, and you're ingesting it into your lakehouse, into your data environment, into this process that you've got. We'll come back to Fabric, but the concept of Fabric here is you've got to get the data into your OneLake. And that's this process of just getting it in, period. You're maintaining the raw state of that source data, as raw as you can get it, with really no data manipulations, just about copying, importing, bringing in the data that you have as raw as possible. If you can store this in the true raw state, even better. This is like something that you would do where you've got unstructured files, say an Excel file. So a lot of still use Excel, a lot of data is there. We want to go into a better data management. We want to import the Excel document directly into a notebook as unstructured data, untouched. So, all the problems and errors and sheets and tables you might have, just untouched. This data being raw, it's unvalidated. It's not supposed to be yet. You're just getting the data into the system. And often this is one of the big problems. You've got terabytes of data that needs to be imported on all the time through real time. You've got data that needs to be updated or imported on a daily, nightly, weekly basis, et cetera. And it could be a huge amount of data, and you just need to get it in. And so that's And that could take a long time if you were just building, say, a BI report and you just wanted to go and grab the data. It could take time just to go grab it to be able to process it. That doesn't make much sense. Let's get it into a layer, scheduled, pipeline, however you might want to get it in. Just get it into the system and maintain that state of it. Now you can, if the data already lives in a lakehouse elsewhere and you can create a shortcut to it, oh yeah, absolutely, even better. But bronze layer, import raw data in as raw as possible into the system so that now you can start to play with it. Brings us then to the next state. So next layer, the silver layer. Okay, well, we're using bronze as a source. You've got another layer and it's importing, it's using all of its data from the bronze layer. The silver should not be pulling from other external sources. That's not the point. Now you might have, fair enough, multiple bronze components for different reasons. Yes, that can happen, and silver may start to pull them together and whatnot. Okay, can definitely do it, but it shouldn't be pulling in any new raw data. It should be pulling from bronze, and this is where you're going to clean the data, transform the data. You're going to remove errors, fix errors. You're going to get rid of unneeded data. You might get rid of columns you don't need, rows you don't need, just blank rows, blank columns, things that are not right. You might start normalizing your data. Generally, this is the cleanup stage because you know that I'm going to go super simple here. That Excel document, that CSV file that you imported, that got imported on a nightly basis, that got imported on a ad hoc kind of basis, it's got problems. I'm sure it does. Someone decided to do a divide by zero. It's going to blow up the whole process. Yeah, I get it. Bronze just imported that data. Silver is now where you're supposed to be looking to clean the data up and do something with it. You're also potentially bringing aggregations together. You might be joining some data. You might be filtering your data. You might be making it cleaner and better, but it's not supposed to be perfect. There's not a semantic model at this point. You're not trying to structure the data for reporting. It's still just data. It's just good, valid, clean data that came in from bronze and can start to be turned into something else, which is again where we're going to hit the next layer. So the next layer then, bronze, silver, now gold. This is where you're taking your data and you're transforming it from information into knowledge. Of course, now you're using silver as your source. So you're importing. I don't like using the word importing, but it's importing in a sense. It's getting all of its source data is from silver, not from bronze. It's going to silver first. Gold is pulling it from silver, and now you're starting to truly aggregate the data, curate that data. And as I said, you're refining it, you're transforming it, you're turning it from data and information into actual knowledge. This data structure, this gold layer this is where you're creating the semantic model. This is where you're truly starting to create relationships between data, something that BI can then easily import, or that you can pull SQL endpoints. You can use SQL endpoints to be able to query the data. This is really good, solid data curated from your organization that can now be used by your organization really to make critical business decisions. That's the whole point, right? I mean, we were grabbing all this data. We want to do something with it. It's designed to help us make better decisions. Sure, it might be used for KPIs. It might be used for different reporting, but it might be just generally used as a dashboard so that we know the health of our organization or what it is that we're doing. But that all drives to the end point of we're trying to make decisions out of it. We've got too little inventory in a certain store because we're expecting something to occur. Maybe AI's even helped with that. We need solid, clean data that people can quickly and easily get to, that is considered enriched and ready to actually turn into knowledge. The concept of gold layer, though, is that we really want the data to be ready for really fast queries. We don't want as much as possible. We're going to see a semantic model kind of change this a little bit. But the concept here is that the data is already in your OneLake. It is ready for direct query. It's ready for good, quick access. It should be properly curated well and enriched well so that the queries to it can quickly extrapolate and pull that data and use it somewhere else, such as, say, like a BI report or something like that. Now, if we want to look at Platinum, this is the only time I'm going to talk about Platinum because it's beyond the scope of this. There's a lot of really interesting stuff here. This is an optional layer. It's something that people, we normally don't do it except on an AI project, by the way. Most of the time we just don't need to if we're just trying to create KPIs, reports, be able to make action items off of data and stuff like that. Often we're not using Platinum. But Platinum is the idea of using gold as a source. And what you're doing at the Platinum level, if you're going to use this, is creating really specialized high value data and information that you want. You might be creating an even more curated subset of data that you could do a gold maybe, but not really. It's designed to be more specific. And where people are really using this, where we're finding it used the most, is around machine learning models, where we want to really tweak the data so that we can build and train and tweak models to be able to drive some information using AI. Maybe we're doing real-time analytics or something, and we've got streaming data that's coming in that needs to be extra processed. We're building like real-time dashboards because the normal process through this could take a little bit of time, and yet you need something like kind of highly curated. And that's where the Platinum layer comes in, because gold is supposed to be, in my head at least, a little more broad overview of your data. But if you wanted to create like really specific curated ideas, this is to me where the Platinum layer should be taking from that gold layer and creating the narrow subset of data that's needed for a very specific thing. You could do it at gold. Originally, that's what people did. But with ML and real-time analytics, people started to find this idea that, well, maybe we should segregate that out, maybe put it in a different engine, somewhere else, because it might overburden what people are trying to do at gold. So let's go back to look at this now. So thinking through what this looks like more in practice in blocks and whatnot. We have data sources. They could be all kinds of things where your data is coming from, files or databases or business apps. You've got different kind of sensors out there. A lot of times we're seeing data come in from files and data. People do a lot of Excel still. I think that you're there as well. And then you have databases and or business apps that drive data into databases that you want to then pull from, including those SaaS applications you're using. A lot of data is being generated, and we'd like to make our own insights. So the idea then is that you use pipelines, you use shortcuts, you use data flows, you copy, you move, you get that data into the bronze layer. Then you've got within your one lake, now, yeah, I've already gone into Fabric, but you go into your one lake, now you've got your bronze, silver, gold, and you're using things like notebooks, Spark jobs, data flows, pipelines, etc., to help continue to improve upon the data from your bronze, silver, and then to gold layer. From the gold layer, that's where you're building that semantic model. That's where you're building the curated, really good, refined data that makes a lot of sense and is ready to drive knowledge. And you're using Direct Lake, you're using Direct Query, etc., to get in to be able to pull into Power BI. You've got your SQL endpoints as well. Now you could use them depending upon how you set all this up. You could be doing a lot of this at different layers, but this is the promise and the premise of the system is that you've got these SQL endpoints here that you could use to start to query your really curated data. I think it's a really good overview. It's kind of simple, 3 simple layers. In practice, it might get a little more challenging. You start to think through the data you've got, how you're bringing it in. You'll run into challenges getting your data, of course. Sure, that's fine. You'll have challenges thinking through exactly what should you do at different layers. When's the right time to do your joins? Is it silver or gold? Maybe it depends, sort of thing. Some answers are easy. Some questions are easy to answer. Some could be a little more challenging. I still have some challenges, but kind of giving you an idea where we had an Excel doc that had lots of tables, lots of sheets, and we wanted to pull in a certain amount of data. And in this particular scenario, we couldn't just copy it into an unstructured one lake files spot. We needed to get it into a data warehouse. And the problem was that the data in Excel was not good. And so we couldn't get it imported into a data warehouse because you just couldn't take the raw data and import it. You had to get rid of some of the errors or through an error with the data warehouse. And so we found that, oh, well, we needed to do a little tweaking before we could store the raw data. Yeah, I mean, sometimes that happens, and I'm sure some of you or some of the true believers in this was like, oh, you should never do that. There's another way. Okay. Well, sometimes though, you got to make it work, and yeah, you just Experience will help you figure that out. What's the value though? So like, what's the point? Why would I want you to even use Medallion? Why should you be thinking about it? And to me, it's a no-brainer, but yeah, that's because it took me time to kind of get there. The whole point of this is to really improve the data quality of the data that you have in your organization and ensure that it's consistent across the org. So what did we do a couple of years ago before we really had a Databricks concept, before we really had lake houses and whatnot? Generally, you can tell me if you're wrong, but this is what I see out there. We created Power BI reports. Everyone did it their own way. Everyone had to create their own date dimension table. They kind of created their own style. Everyone imported the same data within an organization in a different way. It was tweaked and managed differently. You would want to spin up a new one. You needed 3 different data sources from 4 different reports, and it was frustrating. You have to go copy all that. You had all these data flows, Gen 1. You had to go and copy all of them and tweak them to make them work, and it caused friction just to even get things going. You didn't have good quality of data that you guaranteed across your org or across your department or whatnot. And it sure wasn't consistent because of the way we did it. Now, Medallion looks to handle that for you. It looks to say, hey, we're going to have, I'm going to say a single source of truth. I know that that's not always reasonable in most orgs, but like that's the idea and the promise is that you would have one gold layer for a department, for an org, for a process. And many different people, orgs, departments, not orgs, departments, though, could use that data and they knew it was the right data and it was already curated, it was cleaned, it was turned into knowledge, and it has a semantic model behind it. And now I can pull it into a report. And another report could pull in 2 semantic models from 2 completely different completely different gold layers. I mean, very valuable, but the data is good. The data is good. That could really help. This allows you to then take to really control security a little better and really give more refined access to who gets what. What's nice about the layers is that each layer can have different permissions. And so often Bronze is owned by an IT group or something. They're owned by people who already have deep access into the org, and they will go ahead and they will pull all the data together with, never take a lot of these words seriously because it's just easier sometimes. It's the super admin permissions, the root access, and they would get the data into Bronze, and then other people would have access to be able to pull from the SQL endpoints or from in notebooks to be able to go pull the data just from the curated source within Bronze to be able to then turn into silver and then silver to gold, et cetera. And a lot of people in your org would never have any access except to gold. They won't have access to the raw data. They would only have access to the curated data that you've cleaned up for them, that you've made sure it's good, valid data. And this can all be assigned to different groups. Different groups in your org can have all these different permissions. So this turns into something that's significantly more scalable within your data management. You can pull in your data into one or more different lake houses, one or more different Medallion architecture systems, and you can control in a scalable way how the data can get curated, cleaned up, and turned into something really useful for people. So, different kind of use cases here. There are other data management styles, data mesh, Lambda, Kappa, Data Vault. Those are the ones that come to the top of mind. They all have their use, and in fact, like a popular one, say data mesh, decentralized approach to taking the data, treating it as a product. Medallion is actually really good at that. And Medallion, as designed as a concept, is actually supportive of data mesh as well. I just found that this model works really well for a lot of orgs for something that's beyond just trying to create a simple Power BI report from like one simple spreadsheet. If you're trying to manage data for an organization or department that might be coming in from multiple sources, this is a really good approach to ensure really good data that gets at the end of it really good and clean. Now, some advantages to Fabric, why I like Fabric and the way they do it, that, I'm a Microsoft person, so I don't work for Microsoft, but I believe in their systems, and I've bought into their ecosystem. OneLake is just super cool. Once you get the data into the Bronze layer in OneLake, effectively you only have one copy of that data. I mean, I love that. That one's a huge one for me. I think that OneLake, how it's designed, is just super cool. And the other one that I like I think is really interesting is, and I do want to show this, is that in the semantic layer, this in a semantic model within the gold layer that you have, when you make updates in Fabric to the semantic model in gold, as soon as you make the change, you could basically, you're going to your Power BI report, refresh it, it's already visible there. And anybody who is using, who is tied into that semantic model would see that. That to me is super huge and very fascinating and interesting to see in practice. And I do expect to have time to show that to you. So how would you do this in Fabric? Let's go through some of the, we're going to go through the layers again. I'll try to be a little quicker because now it's just, what's this look like in practice? So if we start at the bronze layer, this is all about ingesting data, right? So how are you going to do it? Well, and basically you're pulling it in, right? This is pipelines, data flows, notebooks, etc. So as a reminder, we're ingesting raw data. So data flows and pipelines can be really good to be able to import the data. These are the tools you're going to use. Notebooks can be very helpful as well. Just to pull in raw data. Data pipelines can be really good for it. I'm a data flow person. I just like the way that I build data flows. Gen 2. They're just, it's a way I like to think, but they're not overly good at the bronze layer because you're kind of manipulating the data maybe a little more than you should. And pipelines might work a little better for copying data. Notebooks can work really well, again, for like unstructured data, because then you could just store it in that. Because if you're trying to store unstructured data in a data warehouse, I mean, that's actually really hard to do. Notebooks might be really good here to help you, excuse me, to store them into a lakehouse, so you can put those raw files in there. If you have structured data coming in, I have found data warehouses can work really well. It's just you have that issues with some of the raw data. And if you went down a data warehouse approach at the bronze layer, really you want the schema in that data warehouse to be more fixed. It's just going to work a little easier that way. So you might need to structure your bronze data to have a more structured approach. And so take a financial issue that I ran into recently. So what this really small client was doing was they were tracking it on a weekly basis, their cash flow. And so every week they added a new column across all of their accounts that was able to show what their cash flow looked like across all those different accounts. So every week you had a new column being added. That wasn't really good for importing, because you don't really want to keep adding new columns like that. It would have been great if it was in a lake house. Like, sure, cool, because it could have been a raw file. And what would you have done with that data? You would have pivoted it, right? Because now you can go ahead and grab more structured data. There was more structure that had fewer columns, and you just had a lot more rows to describe it. So what we had to do at that particular case, because we really wanted to work with a simple data warehouse for other reasons, we ended up having to pivot that data. Now, could you do it in Excel? Yeah, absolutely. This client said, well, no, they really wanted it done at bronze layers. So on import, we ended up using a data flow, and we pivoted the data as simple as we could to do that. Now, some of you might say sacrilegious, absolutely a no-no. Okay, sometimes you just got to do things because that's the way life works sometimes. But, you can still try to follow the system as best you can. It's kind of like Agile. You just, can't always do it perfectly, but you do your best. Silver layer. So silver, again, cleans and invalidating. Common approaches here using data flows and notebooks. Pipelines as well, still maybe for scheduling and whatnot. Normally the data becomes much more structured here. Therefore, data warehouses become used. Microsoft's going to say they would typically still suggest lakehouses to be used. You're importing the data into tables now because, again, it should be much more structured. Why? Because you're cleansing it, you're normalizing it, you're getting rid of duplicates, you're getting rid of the errors that might exist in it, you're fixing the nulls or making sure there's something there. Maybe you're going to be doing data where you might be dividing by 0, so you fix that. You potentially add some columns to help describe what the data is doing, joining tables together, generally, turning the data into something better. A lot of times we're using data flows to do this because it's a really easy way to visualize. Those of you who use data flows, you can watch each step go, you can visualize it, you always are getting the output of it. It has a reasonable advanced editor if you need it. It's good and clean. If you have complex data, lots of data flows are not going to be as good for you. This is where notebooks can really come in, and you could do the really fun, cool stuff where you're using PySpark to just totally manipulate and transform the data. all of these tools are valid. There's no reason why you must use one or the other. You're just looking to be able to take the data from bronze. Now you're supposed to be doing you're looking to clean it and transform it into something that's more useful, using the simplistic tools of data flows, pipelines, notebooks, etc. Getting into some sort of repository. Primarily, you're going to be looking at things such as lakehouses and data warehouses. So if we go to gold now, again, this is about transforming and modeling. This is where we can build your semantic model. You've got that endpoint and whatnot. Similar approaches to me as the silver layer. So data flows, pipelines, and notebooks again. The recommended approach, again, this could be very, you could argue each way. The recommended approach is generally using data warehouses because their SQL endpoints can be a little easier to get to. Now, Lakehouses has them, but data warehouses is the way that you would typically look to do it. Because at this point, you should have very structured data. And so you shouldn't need the unstructured value of Lakehouses normally. Even in like real-time analytics, you're looking to attempt to create a more structure that you can then more quickly be able to pull the data out across the organization. This is where you're building that semantic model, though. And you create a shareable model, which is just one of the huge values here for me. When it comes down to it was I wanted a good way to get all my data imported a couple years ago, and I had all this data across the organization, and I wanted it to be good, clean, and curated, and I wanted to be able to separate out the importing from the transforming. And I then wanted a semantic model that anybody could connect to in my org. Like that was it. Medallion made total sense, and I became a convert ever since. And so this whole approach can then enable direct query for your reports, so it can be super fast and super instantaneous to be able to drive reports, drive insights through KPIs and dashboards, etc., based on pre-curated, pre-created, pre-validated data. It is even much easier for non-data scientists, non-data engineers to be able to work with data and drive valuable reports off of correct data using something like the Medallion architecture, and particularly something like Fabric. I wanted to quickly show you, so what's nice, another one of the things I like about data warehouses at gold layer is, and again, you can do a lot of this in lakehouses, I get that, but I am a data warehouse kind of person. I do like that in general. It's just, it's the way I think from my old database days. You can get a really good view within the browser of Fabric to be able to see the tables that exist within your data warehouse. Yes, I know that lakehouses have something similar. You get your queries, you can see the SQL endpoints, you can validate the data that you've got. That makes a lot of sense. You can then go straight into the modeling, see what your model looks like, tweak the model, and make sure that what you're going to present to the end user is actually like super cool. I now want to spend some time thinking through semantic models as well. This might be a review for a bunch of you, but I think it's important to spend some time on. There's two primary schemas most of us are using today. I wanted to talk about star schema, and each one I want to describe, and I've got a visual because I'm a visual person. I think that always helps. The idea of a star schema is where you've taken your data and you've created your fact table. This would be something like all of the orders you've received. So your fact table would be the list of all the orders. And what you do is that fact table is going to reference out dimension tables. So you have fact and dim tables. And the dim tables might be your customers, the things where there's going to have like many to one relationships because one customer might make multiple orders. The product that was ordered, again, multiple orders may reference the same product. Who is the salesperson on it, things like that. Those would all be dimension tables that would help describe a lot of the components that are in that one fact table. The idea is you've denormalized this data. This can be really useful for the simple relationships. More complex relationships we'll get to is where more snowflake can come in. So if it gets complex, probably star is going to get a little more challenging. What's really nice about star schemas is it's really easy to understand. You've got a fact table and dimension tables. Like it creates a star. You're going to see it visually in a second. It just makes sense. The catch is there might be higher storage requirements because you might not have normalized the data or denormalize the data, there might be some duplication going on in some of your dimension tables because you haven't taken it all out and stripped it all out, where there might be that, with a customer, customer, you may want to be able to do things based on a region. And so your customer table might have the same cities named again and again and again, where you might want to split that out into the regions that you address and then who's assigned to those regions. And we'll see that in a second in schema. So it can get a little challenging, or it could just have higher storage requirements because you've duplicated some data in the dimension tables. So you might have some redundant data. Not always, but may. And what that looks like, I grabbed this from Microsoft. I think it's a really good example. And you've got this, as I said, like you've got these sales, and you've got the different dimensions around that, the different products, the dates that they were sold, resellers, etc. So it looks like a star. Snowflake is very similar to star. It's just that you're looking to take the dimension tables and normalize them even more. So the idea here is that you might have multiple related tables from dimension tables, where a dimension table is referencing one or more other dimension tables. So it really just normalizes the data out. So the potential here is you're using less storage, actually, because you're not duplicating as much data at the dimension table level. If you've got really complex hierarchical relationships, which I've found this to be the case with a lot of the data I've worked with, where you've got a lot of things referencing a lot of other things, and you don't want to keep duplicating all that data. You want one source of truth at all the different levels. That this is where the Snowflake might come in. The thing is that this can often require more complex queries, because you're having to join more dimension tables to other dimension tables to get into the fact table to get the view that you're looking for to make it make sense in a given report or something like that. So visually, if you wanted to see that star schema, I grabbed this from a company. I referenced it at the bottom, so you can see if you want to go grab it. But here, this idea that you might have a fact of sales. Within that, you might have a store, but then you want to know what the geography is of the store. So you have a list of geographies, or you have a list of brands. Okay, so now you could have a product that could be tied to brands or maybe even product categories. And you wanted all that split out instead of having the product know all of the categories. And so you might be repeating a category again and again. You want it referencing a list of categories, etc. So it creates much more of a snowflake that can get kind of complex. I wanted to show you star schema kind of in practice. Probably a lot of you have seen semantic models like this. You've probably seen this in Power BI. What's I think kind of nice is you basically get the same thing in data warehouses and in lakehouses as well. In the browser, you get a very similar look, and you could basically set up your relationships using the tools and techniques that you've already used. So what I want to do now is I want to talk about some challenges and then also some suggestions, and then looking to spend the last couple minutes actually showing some of this in practice. So here's hopefully where some of these I've already talked about, but I'm really trying to drive home now some of the value of, I hope you pull away a few things here. So some of the challenges I've ran into, for sure. In fact, I've ran into all of these in different projects. So these are my experiences, but I've seen people talk about them as well. So yeah. It's sometimes challenging to know, like, what's the right way to move data through the architecture. Should you be using pipelines or data flows, or should you using Spark? Should you how should you be pulling the data in? And often this is up to you. You might find your approach that you like the most, and often it'll probably work fine. If you like PySpark and you like working in notebooks, have at it. Like, great tool. Very useful. If the data is simple and you are a data flow person, then use data flows. That's my preferred approach, just because it's easy. But maybe you need better orchestration. Okay, so now you need to use data pipelines that will orchestrate and call the data flow. That's where you'll do because you might need to track error tracking or something like that. And data flows are not as good at working with unexpected errors that will still produce some sort of results. So maybe a data pipeline might be better. Maybe you use data pipelines only to get into bronze, but then once you go from bronze to silver, you look to use data flows. That's all fine. Like, really, any approach that you find to be useful is good. Some best practices might be, and that's actually my next slide, but best practices there is, if you've got really complex data, you're probably going to find you're going to need to go to notebooks, because it can just handle that kind of data a lot easier. But if you've got, under tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of rows, data pipeline or data flow might work really well for you. It depends. If you are pulling in data from IoT or something else, or from SQL, you might need to use different approaches, and it's okay. It's a challenge. There's no the answer. There's no one way to do it, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I think it's a good thing. But you would want to decide that. So then you want to think through, okay, well, where are you going to store the data? Should you be using lakehouses or data warehouses as your two primary repositories? A lot of it's still up to you. If you're trying to store unstructured data, lakehouses is probably the way to go. It's very much okay to use both at different layers. You might use the lakehouse at the bronze and silver. You might then move it into data warehouse because now you should be more structured at gold. It might be a little quicker as a data warehouse with its SQL endpoints at gold. I've done projects all data warehouse. I've done them all lakehouse. I've done both. So it's a challenge though. Which do you want to do? Fabric has the concept of workspaces. So how should you break up your projects into workspaces? And generally, practical guidance, I'm going to get to that. I have traditionally found you're creating a workspace per layer. Now, my demo, I'm not going to do that, mainly just for simplicity's sake. It's easier to see all of it. But normally, we are creating unique workspaces for each layer, but it even gets more complex than that, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But it's a challenge. How are you going to split up all of the processes into some sort of buckets to make them make sense, as well as then to properly give permissions to these different layers? And here's one of the big problems is that I'm having with, which is workspaces. If you create a workspace for bronze, if silver needs to be able to read from bronze into silver, it needs to be able to import the data. It needs to get the data, right? So you want the silver layered person, they need to have read access to the workspace for bronze. But effectively, if you have read access to the bronze layer, you can see the entire workspace and you can see all of the data that might be in the data repository, that lakehouse, the data warehouse. Yeah, you can start to add some stuff to help control that, but it gets much more complex. And it just can be a challenge of how are you going to set up your segregation system, your strategy, and how are you going to assign the permissions to that? And who's going to then manage these different layers? Are you going to do it through permissions? You can set up the idea of domains. There are challenges that you will encounter that have many answers. There's no the way to do it. Getting towards the end here, some big challenges that I see. So which model scheme are you going to use? And you might say, well, look, I really want to stick with star, but you realize that probably won't work in larger projects. And can you be true to it? Because you might start having multiple fact tables because that's not unusual. And so then how do you then maybe you have a dimension table that might be needed by 5 different fact tables, and it's not really star schema. It's starting to get a little hybrid-y, and you might need to start watching the joins, and it can get complex fast. So how are you going to do it? What are you going to try to stick to? What kind of complexity can you have? How much are you going to normalize or denormalize data so that you can get the efficient throughput you want? Because don't forget, gold is ideally supposed to be designed to be to enable quick queries. And then lastly here, what are you going to do at each layer? I've given you the theory. Is that really going to make sense for you? When exactly are you going to join tables or denormalize them? When you some of it's easy. To me, the cleaning of data, silver, straight up. Importing raw data, easy, bronze, straight up. Creating a semantic model, easy, gold. Okay, but at what time do you start to take columns of data and add extra columns that are based on that data? Do you want to do it in silver and gold? And it can get a little more tricky because maybe that's more of turning information into knowledge. Well, maybe that's going to happen at gold, and that's when you should be adding that column or changing the way that you've manipulated the data. But a lot of joins will occur at the silver layer. So there's a theory to this, but I've seen every project be a little different, and for different reasons. You might be tweaking what you'd be doing at each layer. Some easy ones are, I've already said the easy ones though. Import, bronze, cleaning, silver, curating for final star schema, or for schema, excuse me, your schema model. That's going to happen at gold, or should happen at gold. You shouldn't need a schema at your or a semantic model. Jeez, using the wrong words there. You shouldn't need a semantic model at bronze or silver. So before I get into a demo, I do want to talk about some practical guidance. It gives me about 10 minutes for my demo, which is about what I need. I want to show you some of the stuff in Magic, so show you some of this in action, show you some of the magic that I've seen. I have found, really without fail, and I know my demo's not going to show it, but again, that's just for easier, is that each layer is going to get its own workspace. And I have found it's better that the workspace includes the layer name in it. Which means you're going to have some sort of word or initials that's going to talk about brown, silver, gold. It just helps people know what that thing is for. Basically, the same thing happens with your tables at gold. They should have the word fact or dim in it. It's just going to make life a lot easier for people so they know how the data is modeled and the way that it's structured. This approach allows you to more easily be able to see what you're doing at each layer. It allows you to isolate it. It allows you to set permissions much more granularly, because often, as I said, like IT or something like that will own the importing of the data. They've got the access to get it all in. And you don't really want a lot of your end users to have access to that raw data. They shouldn't. It's just, maybe it's too much. Maybe there's things in there that they shouldn't have access to. Maybe like there's tabs in an Excel doc, there's data in the database they shouldn't have access to. That bronze layer would have very few people who'd have right access to it, to be able to add data, few people who could read it to get it read into silver. And then you're going to typically have a lot more read folk in gold, but again, few people who could write to it, few people who are setting this all up. In the bronze layer, if you can store the raw data in its original format, that's best. It really is. Now, often, like if it's a SQL database, you might not be able to, depending upon if you can link to the data, or you definitely have to copy it over. But if your data is already in a lakehouse somewhere, again, in any other ecosystem, it doesn't have to be Microsoft, use shortcuts if you can. So if you don't have to import the data into Fabric, that's not a bad thing. So if you can use shortcuts, that can really be helpful. I have found that data flows are really good for managing the data and moving it around and manipulating the data and tweaking it. I like the interface for the more simplistic data, where you don't have millions of rows and you're not doing it a lot, because it's not the most efficient, let's be fair. Orchestration of data is really good for pipelines. So two approaches here. Like, one is you can set up a data flow, you can set a schedule to it, and it can easily run, right? Easy. You could just create a data flow, though, that sits there, and a data pipeline will now do the orchestration. It could get triggered, it can have timers, whatever. And as part of the process, it will kick off a data flow, take the response from the data flow, and make actions occur from there. That can work really well as well. Notebooks are best, in my opinion, for the large scale data transformation. And I know my demo is not going to show this. I kind of funny. I wanted to create an easy demo, and the easiest way was to create one workspace. And I use notebooks for my data transformation, and the data is simple. I get it, but I kind of wanted to show some complex stuff while I did it. But in practice, I have found that we're using a lot of data flows on more simplistic data. If we need better orchestration, we'll use pipelines. But if we really have a lot of data we need to manipulate, that's where we're going to use notebooks, because we have a far richer coding library to work with. I've already talked about semantic layer a lot. It's going to happen at gold. I have found data warehouses is very useful for this. It seems to be the most efficient and cost-effective for me for most of the projects I'm working on. And then I'm using those SQL endpoints to be able to query the data. And then what's super cool is that Power BI can connect to that semantic model cleanly and easily. And here's one that I really like doing is, and I do want to show this, when you link a Power BI report to your semantic model coming out of gold, you might want to build measures on it. And often I debug measures by seeing them. It's the way it goes. And so often I'm in Power BI and I will build the measure in Power BI tied into the semantic model that I pulled. And then once I got it right, I then take that measure, I move it into the semantic model in gold, and I delete it from Power BI. I hit refresh and it's right back. It's really cool stuff that I found very useful in this whole methodology. And it's nice to see all the tools all come together in a very large ecosystem. It's another one of the benefits of Fabric is it's looking to do the whole thing. If you use other systems, often they only do pieces of this, and you're going to need third parties to help you move data all the way through and to be able to report upon it. And often there's complexity in trying to get all that to work. So with that, I want to show you a quick demo. Hopefully this won't take too long. I'm going to quickly look to see. Okay, I saw some questions come in. These questions look really good. Thank you. I'm going to get to them. You'll get my answers, but I want to show the demo. If I can't do it now, then I will show it. I'll get to your questions through the chat after this is up. I know you're going to move on to other sessions. This should be kept up so you can see it. So what you're looking at here is you're looking at a really simple warehouse workspace. Excuse me. I called it Medallion demo. And what you're looking at is basically I have a lake house. I know you're supposed to have 3. You should have gold, silver, bronze, or bronze, silver, gold. And then I have some notebooks. But if we quickly jump into our lake house, what we can see at the lower left here is in the files, I've imported some raw data. That's all really bronze is, importing of data. Lots you could do here. Again, I could put this in a data warehouse. I could put it into structured whatever. But at the bronze layer, I just imported the data. What that allows me to then do is to create, say, a notebook where I can now start to manipulate that data. And so using my PySpark, I can go ahead and add code, and I could go and import the data from bronze. I can go ahead and create a new schema where I might store my new curated and validated data. I might do some error checking and remove some components and finally get the data inserted in. And every time this would run, it would basically say, okay, well, do I need to update it or do I need to insert new values? And what that ends up doing is it ends up creating this code, would end up creating some sort of table. In this case, I called it sales silver. And, it allowed me to have the data. Now I could go into the lake house and I could go to that table and I can actually see it. In interest in time, what I want to now do is I want to show you the gold. Now this one's a little more complex, hard to go through in the time that I have, but I'm basically importing my data from silver. Once I get in from silver, I start to manipulate it. I start creating multiple dimension tables. I start splitting the data out. I know there's a lot here, but you can kind of start to see some of the visualizations as I pull data out of silver and turn it into dimension and facts tables. And what is nice about notebooks is you get to see the data that you've ran, so you can see visually what's going on. And basically, I'm quickly displaying some of the data just so I can validate it as I'm building and programming my way. And then there's a whole bunch of code. I know this is a lot. It's creating a lot of dimension tables. And then finally, at the end, eventually, I know this is a lot. It should be creating my fact table, and it created a fact table. It took a very specific set of data from my silver and put it into gold. And what that looks like, if I go into the lake house, again, don't do this in prod, please. But I can have my silver, I have my gold, I have my dim, I have my facts. I can see this data, and I can quickly understand what it is so that I can do something with it. I don't want to wait for this if this is going to take too long to load the preview. But I do like this whole feature set where I can go into my lakehouse and I can see the data. Now, if you're in a data warehouse, you get something very similar. You get a SQL endpoint, so you can play with SQL a little more to be able to query the data. Yeah, this is just taking too long. But you can actually see it before you do anything with it. You can create a new semantic model in a lakehouse or in a data warehouse. You have basically the same approach. Let's go ahead and go look at that semantic model. We're going to go to the open data model. I know I'm clicking fast. This isn't, there's a bunch of sessions for you on how to use Fabric. I want you to get the concepts here. But what you can see here is that I've got my fact table. I added it. If you want to know how to add, you edit tables, and you can then add the tables that you wanted to add. So you can see I didn't add silver because why would I do that? But again, you should do this in production. And then what you're able to do is basically, like you can in Power BI, you can just take your columns and drag and drop them to the other tables to create the relationships. And any given relationship, you can control it. Once this relationship has been created, so that was quick, I know, but that wasn't, Fabric is a whole different thing. What I want to show you is using it. So I'm flipping over here to Power BI desktop. Yeah, I could be using Power BI in the browser, but I still found desktop to be a little cleaner, a little easier. I can go ahead and get data. I can connect to my Power BI semantic models. It connects to me and it connects. I have gold right there. I have my semantic model for gold instantly available. I just think that's super cool. So let's go ahead and it will show up here on the right-hand side. I'm looking over here. This is where it's going to show up. It's connecting that semantic model. You can see it quickly saw it. One of the things I want to show here is under fact sales gold, I have a total quantity. That's a measure that was created. If I click on it, I can't tweak that. That was already created. I created that in my semantic model. But let's quickly create a simple line chart. Let's go ahead and throw in, let's do order date here and quantity on the y-axis. Let's see what that does. Yeah, sure. Okay. So I'm able to quickly get some data in there. Not too bad. I'm going to add a, I want to add a oops, I didn't want to do that. I'm going to add a new visual. I'm going to add my total quantity to it. So I have a total quantity, some sort of measure. But you know what I really want to do is I want to add another measure. And I could be terrible at DAX sometimes. So I might need to, I might need a little bit of help sometimes. So, you know, one of the things I might like to do is, let me see where I want to grab this. All right, so one of the things I might want to do is go over to good old Copilot, and I might say in a BI semantic model, there's a table of sales, create a measure that sums up the unit price column, because I don't always forget all that stuff, and I don't always remember all that stuff. And so, okay, well, that's interesting. So it kind of gives me something. I didn't tell it the name of my my table and whatnot, but you know, it gave me some interesting code. I know some was easy, but hey, easy enough. So let me go ahead and add a new measure to my gold. Now I had to tweak it a little bit, but it's basically the same thing. I'm summing up from gold my unit price. Okay. What's super cool? Oh, it's taking too long to show. Now let me show if I can show this. Like total quantity, what's really nice about these measures here is you can change the formatting here in the lower right-hand side. So if you had currency or something, you could actually say it's going to be currency. And now when you import that semantic model, you can now use it as is. Perfect. So now if I go ahead and refresh, what should happen if this refreshes, there we go. Unit price is already available. I can go ahead and add it, and I can use it. I personally think that's some really cool stuff. Think it through some of the ideas here that someone could own the data structure, can own the semantic model. Now consumers can just use it. And think big here. Don't think really small on one little project you have. You can have all these people creating and curating data, syncing it all up for you so that your BI users, the people that are going to be driving business decisions, can have that instantly. And they don't have to know how to do a lot of this stuff. They can just start dragging and dropping visuals on the screen and start doing something with it. Super, super cool in my opinion. So let's see how I'm doing on time. I know I've got like about a minute left, right? 2 minutes left. Perfect. We'll make this work. All I really want to do is sum this up, and then I'm going to go through, I'll go through those questions as quick as I can to answer what I can. Medallion architecture is a great way to work with your data through this whole layered approach. There's these 3 layers I want you to remember: bronze, silver, gold. The whole point of this is to be able to create consistent, clean data that has been validated for your org to now use. So all those data sources can be pulled together into one approach, and now you can play with it. I have found, I know I'm a Microsoft shill, but it's the truth. I have found that what Fabric can do to pull it all together, to give us all the tools that make the most sense for you, is really good. And there's a really high value to all of that. I have some resources here. I don't know a good way for you to get to these. There's just too much here. You know what I can do is I'll copy and paste it in the chat so you have the resources. I appreciate your time with me today. I've got a minute left, so let me see if I can get through any of your questions. Oh, you got a lot of good questions here. I don't know if I'm gonna have time to get through them all. So thank you so much. Continue to ask your questions. I will do everything I can to answer them past the minute here. Can you share my presentation deck? I will attempt to. Would you map the same layers into a SQL warehouse as a whole flow separate by schemas or split into dedicated lake warehouses? I think I answered that question. No, I probably didn't. No. Yeah, I would split them into dedicated lakehouses or warehouses. I'm pretty sure on that first question from Stefan, I would do that. We're at time. So thank you again, everybody. I will figure out a way to get you links. Follow this chat when you leave this, if you can. Try to keep the chat open for a few minutes. I'm going to actually stay on just so I can keep the chat open personally, and we'll go from there. So thank you so very much. Have a wonderful rest of the conference. Ping me if you are looking for more help or thoughts, or you want to bounce ideas off of. I appreciate everyone's time. Looking forward to the next time I get to see you all again. Thank you so much.